Well, it's after 10, so I think we better get started. We have some pretty tough chapters to get through. I believe this is session 7 now. Session 7.
Just a little bit.
I think last time we got through chapter 31, the final speech of Job. Now we get to we come to a young man called Elihu. This is a new character. He was not introduced with Job's friends. It's a new character. And because of the style and language of these chapters, we're going to try to get through chapter 37 today, 32 through 37. And because of the style and language of these chapters, most commentators think that this section was added by a later editor. Probably, maybe, I'm guessing here, without this section, 32 through 37, the transition between Job's final speech and God's discourses would be very abrupt. Because, of course, Job says, God punishes the righteous and rewards the wicked, and there's no reason I should be in this predicament. And when we get to God's speech next week, we'll see that God starts off, it reminds me a whole lot of God's speech in the book, at the end of the book of Jonah, where he says, listen, Jonah, I'm God. I can make a tree grow if I want. I can make a tree die if I want. I can save whoever I want, referring to saving all of the people of Nineveh, which Job thought was a terrible thing for God to do. So that speech in Jonah reminds me a lot about God's speech starting in chapter 38 of Job, the book of Job. So that would be a very abrupt transition. Elihu brings up, for example, maybe God chastises in order to save. In other words, adversity may make us rethink the path that we're on in life, maybe turn our lives around and lead to salvation that way. So the Elihu speeches sort of soften that transition a little bit, although they are not helpful to Job at all, as we'll see. In fact, Elihu will accuse Job of adding rebellion to whatever his other sins are. So starting with chapter 32, I'll go through this. Some of these chapters are very difficult. Normally, so far, I've been mainly using the book by Edward Greenstein, a new translation of Job. But there are some verses in this section where Greenstein's translation is not satisfying. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. So I have been referring to the other book that I'm using, Job, a New Translation by Marvin H. Pope. Marvin H. Pope is professor of Northwest Semitic languages at Yale. Edward Greenstein is a professor of the Bible at a university in Israel. So to get started here, chapter 32. So these three men, Job's friends, ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, became angry. He was angry at Job because he justified himself rather than God. He was angry also at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, though they had declared Job to be in the wrong. There are some ancient manuscripts that say they had declared God to be in the wrong. The implication there is that Job's three friends, although they were trying to support God, didn't do God any favors by what they said. Okay, they were just as hard on God, just as wrong about God as as about Job. So verse 4, now Elihu had wanted to speak to Job because they were older than he, but when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mount, now Elihu had waited to speak to Job because They were older than he. He's giving deference to his elders here. But when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouths of these three men, he became angry. Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, answered, I am young in years and you are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let days speak and many years teach wisdom. This, in other words, he said to himself, let those who are the elder do the teaching the wisdom. But truly it is in the spirit and immortal, the breath of the Almighty that makes for understanding. It is not the old that are wise, nor the aged that understand what is right. Therefore I say, listen to me, let me also declare my opinion. Let me skip down in the interest of time. We do have 6 chapters to get through today. Verse 13, yet do not say we have found wisdom. God may vanquish him, not a human. He has not directed his words against me, and I will not answer him with your speeches. Another possible translation would be, had he directed his words to me, I would not answer him with your speeches. Elihu disapproved of what the friends were saying. Verse 15, they are dismayed or confounded. They answer no more. They have not a word to say. Then he says, going down to verse 18, for I am full of words, the spirit within me constrains me. My heart is indeed like wine that has no vent. Like new wineskins, it is ready to burst. He can hardly contain himself. The words want to come out. I must speak so that I may find relief. I must open my lips and answer. I will not show partiality to any person or use flattery toward anyone, for I do not know how to flatter, or my maker would soon put an end to me. So, chapter 33, Elihu begins speaking to Job. But now hear my speech, O Job, and listen to all my words. See, I open my mouth, the tongue in my mouth speaks. Then he tries to assure Job that even though Job is terrified to approach God, he does not have to be terrified to speak to Elihu. Verse 6, see, before God, I am as you are. I too was formed from a piece of clay. No fear of me need terrify you. My pressure will not be heavy on you. Well, we'll see about that, thinking about what's coming up here. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words. You say, I am clean without transgression. I am pure, there is no iniquity in me. Look, he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks and watches all my steps, all my paths or steps. This phrase was used early on in the book. It's difficult to understand how you could walk with your feet in stocks. Greenstein says it might be more correct to revocalize some of these words and say he puts lime on my feet. In other words, a light powder on my feet, so that when I walk, my steps are obvious and he watches all of my steps. Verse 12, but in this you are not right. I will answer you. God is greater than any mortal. Why do you contend against him, saying he will answer none of my words? For God speaks in one way and in two, though people do not perceive it. So God, even though God speaks in more than one way, human beings can be deaf to what God is saying. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on mortals while they slumber on their beds, then he opens their ears and terrifies them with warning. We're talking about dreams, nightmares here, right? That he may turn them aside from their deeds and keep them from pride, to spare their souls from the pit in other words, Sheol, the abode of the dead. Their lives from traversing the river, also a metaphor for dying, crossing the river. They are also chastened with pain upon their beds and with continual strife in their bones, so that their lives loathe bread and their appetites dainty food. So even good food tastes bad to these people. Their flesh is so wasted away that it cannot be seen, and their bones, once visible, now stick out. Their souls draw near the pit, and their lives to those who bring death. Then if there should be for one of them an angel, a mediator, one of 1,000 who declares a person upright, he is gracious to that person. That is this angel we're talking about now. And he is gracious to that person and says, deliver him from going down into the pit. I have found a ransom. Let his flesh become fresh with youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. Then he prays to God, the angel that is, prays to God and is accepted by him. He comes into his presence with joy, and God repays him for his righteousness. Now that person sings to others or returns to others and says, I sinned and perverted what was right, and it was not paid back to me. In other words, it was not worth it. What I did was not worth it. He has redeemed my soul from going down to the pit, and my life shall see light. God indeed does all these things twice, 3 times with mortals. You know, that's an idiom for over and over. Remember, the disciples asked Jesus in the New Testament, should we forgive as many as 7 times? Jesus says, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, right? Over and over. And that's the meaning here. God does this, saves people over and over again. Verse 30, to bring back their souls from the pit so that they may see the light of life. Pay heed, Job, listen to me, be silent and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me, speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me, be silent, and I will teach you wisdom. So end of chapter 33. Any questions or comments so far about this young man, Elihu? Let's move on to chapter 34. Oh, chapter 34, early on, has one of the great sections of Hebrew poetry in here. I really like this. Then Elihu continued and said, hear my words, you wise men. Give ear to me, you who know. Verse 3, for the ear tests words as the palate tastes food. Let us choose what is right. Let us determine among ourselves what is good. I love this translation of verse 3. For the ear tests words as the palate tastes food. Notice, same concept, tests and tastes, but revocalizing, different vocalizations produce different meanings. So this imitates the Hebrew. The ancient Hebrew has no vowels, so depending on how you pronounce a word, that determines its meaning. Tests and tastes. Now, the thought is continued in verse 4, but it's not quite as obvious in this translation. Let us choose what is right. Let us determine among ourselves what is good. Choose, a better translation may be examine. And of course, for examine, you could use the word test. Let us test what is right. The Hebrew word for good, in the next phrase, is tov. When applied to food, it could mean sweet. I suppose good food is sweet and bad food is bitter. So it can mean sweet. So there's the tasting metaphor again. Let us test what is right. Let us determine among ourselves what tastes sweet. Verse 5, for Job has said, I am innocent and God has taken away my right. That is Job's right to justice. In spite of being right, I am counted a liar, or alternatively, For the charges against me, I am wounded. The wounded metaphor continues in the next line. My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. Who is there like Job, who drinks up scoffing like water, who goes in company with evildoers and walks with the wicked? For he has said, it profits one nothing to take delight in God. Actually, I'm not sure Job actually meant that. I think Job was quoting the wicked when he said that. But Elihu is accusing Job of believing that it doesn't do any good to take delight in God. Verse 10, therefore hear me, you who have sense. Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. Pardon me. Let me skip down to verse 14 in the interest of time. If he should take back his spirit to himself and gather to himself his breath, all flesh would perish together and all mortals return to dust. That refers to God's animating spirit. It was thought that we breathe because God breathed God's breath into us. And if God would suddenly take away his animating spirit, everything that breathes would die at that point. Verse 16. These words are in the singular, which means that Elihu is now speaking just to Job. If you have understanding, hear this. Listen to what I say. Shall one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn one who is righteous and mighty? That is, are you telling me you're condemning God? God who says to a king, you scoundrel, and to princes, you wicked men, who shows no partiality to nobles, nor regards the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of his hands. In a moment they die. At midnight, the people are shaken and pass away. Shaken, literally flutter like a moth. And the mighty are taken away by no human hand. So they perish by God, not by human hands. Verse 21, for his eyes are upon the ways of mortals, and he sees all their steps. There is no gloom or deep darkness where evildoers may hide themselves. Skipping again, verse 28. Let me start with 26. He strikes them for their wickedness while others look on, because they turned aside from following him and had no regard for any of his ways, so that they caused the cry of the poor to come to him, and he heard the cry of the afflicted. When he is quiet, who can condemn? This may refer to the cry of the poor that we just read about. We could read this, when he quiets, who can be noisy? When he hides his face, who can behold him? Whether it be a nation or an individual. Or he looks over nation and individual so that the godless should not reign, or those who ensnare the people in sin. So then Elihu says, for has anyone said to God, or this may be a command, you must say to God, I have endured punishment, I will not offend anymore. Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do it no more. Will he then pay back to suit you because you rejecting God's chastisement? For you must choose and not I, therefore declare what you know. Those who have sense will say to me, and the wise who hear me will say, Job speaks without knowledge, his words are without insight. Would that Job were tried to the limit, because his answers are those of the wicked, for he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hands among us, or his crimes are great among us, and he multiplies his words against God. So now Elihu is accusing Job of adding rebellion to whatever else Job did to deserve what he's going through. Elihu may even be implying that, Job, if you weren't rebellious to God, you would be out of this mess by this time. His sin is now one of rebellion.
Steve, question?
Yes.
In verse 29, it says whether he is a nation. What's the Hebrew word there? Would you know? I mean, nation's a late concept, right?
Nation probably means an ethnicity, or right, like Canaanite versus Israelite, something like that. I don't know the actual Hebrew word there, but nations usually refer to, in those times, the word nation was used to refer to an ethnicity.
Right.
Anything else before we get started again? Okay, chapter 35. Elihu continued and said, do you think this to be just? You say, I am in the right before God, implying Job thinks he's right, which means that God is wrong. So this is, Elihu is hinting at maybe possible blasphemy here. If you ask, what advantage have I? How am I better off than if I had sinned? I will answer you and your friends with you. Look at the heavens and see, observe the clouds which are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do? What do you do to him? He's saying your sin isn't really hurting God, you know, right? It's hurting yourself. And let me continue here with verse 7. If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Is God the one that benefits from your righteousness? No. Verse 8, your wickedness affects others like you, and your righteousness other human beings. So really, whether you're wicked or righteous doesn't hurt or help God. You're doing these things to your fellow human beings. Verse 9, because of the multitude of oppressions, people cry out. They call for help because of the arm of the mighty. But no one says, where is God, my maker, who gives strength in the night, who teaches us more than the animals of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the air? He's talking about people who cry out, but don't pray to God. People who are just complaining, in other words. Verse 12, they cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of the evildoers. Surely God does not hear an empty cry, in other words, an insincere prayer, nor does the Almighty regard it. How much less when you say that you do not see him, that the case is before him and you are waiting for him. And now, because his anger does not punish and he does not greatly heed transgression, Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies words without knowledge. Let me give you an alternative translation for 15 and 16. And now he does not punish in anger, and he does not greatly harm the sinner. In other words, God is good. Chastisement does not greatly harm the sinner, and God does not do this out of anger, but out of concern. Okay. Verse 16, yet, even so, Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies words without knowledge.
Steve?
Yeah.
So I got a couple weird quick questions. Are these Jewish people that we're talking about or some other ethnicity?
Elihu is a good Jewish name.
Okay.
Job's friends are probably from southern Edom or northern Arabia.
So they have a Jewish concept of God, all these people then?
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah. All of them have sort of the same concept of God. They're just arguing theology here.
Like good Jewish rabbis, right?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I don't know, it may have been a Jewish rabbi who added this section about Elihu. I don't know.
Because they all assume that God exists. That's really the basis of my question, Steve. I'm just curious as to where they got their concept of God in the first place.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They all assume that God exists. They all believe in God. They differ a little bit as far as whether God punishes out of anger or out of concern, whether God's justice is always true. Job says, no, it isn't. I'm an example where it's not. Job's friend says, no, God's justice is always true. Because you're suffering, you must have done something wrong. So they differ in their beliefs, but they all believe in God. The next two chapters, I just went through these last night or yesterday afternoon. These have some problem verses. This is where I was not entirely satisfied with Edward Greenstein's translation. It seemed to be confusing in places. And so I referred to Marvin Pope's translation, and that gave me some insight that I really needed. So hold on tight and we'll go through these two difficult chapters. Chapter 36, Elihu continued and said, bear with me a little, and I will show you, for I have something to say on God's behalf. I will bring my knowledge from far away and ascribe righteousness to my maker. Pope feels that Elihu is quoting God here in this verse. When he says, I will bring my knowledge from far away, it's not Elihu is saying, well, this is what God says. I will bring my knowledge from far away and ascribe righteousness or provide justice to my creation, to those I have created. Just no alternative. For truly my words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you. Verse 5, surely God is mighty and does not despise any. He is mighty in strength of understanding. The Hebrew is a little confused here, according to Pope. The word mighty is duplicated in the first phrase and the second phrase, which is not typical of Hebrew poetry. Usually the synonyms are used. So there may be a scribal error that duplicated the Hebrew word for mighty. We don't know. He does not keep the wicked alive, but gives the afflicted their right. He does not withdraw his eyes from the righteous. But with kings on the throne, he sets them forever and they are exalted. God places kings on the throne and sets them there. They are exalted, but what happens if they turn to sin? Verse 8, and if they are bound in fetters and caught in the cords of affliction, that is, God has afflicted them because of their sin, then he declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they are behaving arrogantly. He opens their ears to instruction and commands that they return from iniquity. If they listen and serve him, they complete their days in prosperity and their years in pleasantness. But if they do not listen, they shall perish by the sword and die without knowledge. Perish by the sword may be cross the channel, maybe another reference to crossing the river to the abode of the dead. I'm going to take a sip of water. I'm getting a frog in my throat. Verse 13, the godless in heart cherish anger. They do not cry for help when he binds them. They die in their youth, and their life ends in shame. Literally in the Hebrew, their life ends among the temple prostitutes. That's the metaphor for shame in the Hebrew. He delivers the afflicted by their affliction. That's a little confusing. You might be tempted to think, well, maybe it should be he delivers the afflicted out of their affliction. But when you think about it, you know, if affliction is intended by God to get people to straighten out, to go over onto the right path, then maybe it is he delivers the affliction. Ironically, affliction may be the way out of affliction if it causes you to change your ways. Continuing verse 15, and opens their ear by adversity. They might wake up and listen because of adversity. Verse 16, he also allured you out of distress, or drew you out of distress into a broad place where there was no constraint. And what was set on your table was full of fatness. In other words, a table piled with rich food. 17. Here we come into some verses that are problematic. But you are obsessed with the case of the wicked. Judgment and justice seize you. According to Professor Pope, he would translate this, but you did not judge the case of the wicked. You belied the orphan justice. 18, beware that wrath does not entice you into scoffing, and do not let the greatness of the ransom turn you aside. Again with Pope, beware that wealth does not entice you into sin, and do not let the greatness of the bribe turn you aside. Verse 19, will your cry avail to keep you from distress, or will all the force of your strength? Again with Pope, will your opulence avail to keep you from distress, or will all the power of your wealth? Verse 20, do not long for the night when peoples are cut off in their place. Cut off means die early, die in their sleep before their time. Beware, do not turn to iniquity, because of that you have been tried by affliction. See, God is exalted in his power. Who is a teacher like him? Who has prescribed for him his way, or who can say, you have done wrong? Who can tell God he's in the wrong? Elihu is accusing Job of doing exactly that. Remember to extol his work, of which mortals have sung. All the people have looked on it, everyone watches it from far away. Surely God is great, and we do not know him. The number of his years is unsearchable. Now, this is interesting. In this next section, for the rest of this chapter and into the next chapter, Elihu uses metaphors of the seasons. I think this is quite interesting. First, autumn, verse 27. For he draws up the drops of water, he distills his mist and rain. which the skies pour down and drop upon mortals abundantly. Yeah, we kind of know about that today, don't we? It's rainy. Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds, the thunderings of his pavilion? See, he scatters his lightning around him and covers the roots of the sea. In other words, the floor of the sea floor. For by these he governs people and gives food in abundance. He covers his hands with the lightning. Sometimes people referred to the clouds as God's hands in the sky, right? So that's what he covers his hands. In other words, he covers his clouds with the lightning and commands it to strike the mark. The next verse is a little confusing. Its crashing tells about him. He is jealous with anger against iniquity. Again, the translation might be better. He speaks with his thunder, venting his anger against iniquity. Chapter 37, continuing with the autumn motif. At this, in other words, the thunder, at this also my heart trembles and leaps out of its place. Listen to the thunder of his voice and the rumbling that comes from his mouth. Under the whole heaven, he lets it loose and his lightning to the corners of the earth. After his voice roars, he thunders with his majestic voice, and he does not restrain the lightning when his voice is heard. God thunders wondrously with his voice. He does great things that we cannot comprehend. Now we move from autumn into winter. Verse 6. For to the snow, he says, fall on the earth, and the shower of rain, his heavy shower of rain, serves as a sign on everyone's hand, so that all whom he has made may know it. Then the animals go into their lairs and remain in their dens. From its chamber comes the whirlwind and cold from the scattering winds. By the breath of God, ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen fast. He loads the thick cloud with moisture. The clouds scatter his lightning. They turn round and round by his guidance to accomplish all that he commands them on the face of the habitable world. Whether for correction or for his land or for love, he causes it to happen. Probably better would be for whether to punish his land or to love it, he causes it to happen. I guess winter weather could in some way be thought of as a punishment, but punish or love, he causes it to happen. Hear this, O Job, stop and consider the wondrous works of God. Do you know how God lays his command upon them and causes the lightning of his cloud to shine? Do you know the balancings of the clouds? That's an awkward word. Let's use, do you know the spreading of the clouds? The wondrous works of the one whose knowledge is perfect. Now we move on to summer. Verse 17. You whose garments are hot when the earth is still because of the south wind. Can you, like him, spread out the skies, hard as a molten mirror? Back in those times, those people thought of the sky as a dome, a solid dome. And the reference here is like when you're going to make a metal pot, a metal bowl, you have to pound it into that round shape, right? So that's the metaphor. We might read it, can you, like him, hammer out the skies, hard as a metal mirror? Following Professor Pope, I'm going to insert here between verses 18 and 19, I'm going to insert verse 21, because we just got done talking about the sky, right? The spreading out in a dome above. So verse 21 says, no one can look on the light when it is bright in the skies, when the wind has passed and cleared them. More about the sky. So Pope relocates verse 21 there, and then goes on with verse 19. Teach us what we shall say to him. We cannot draw up our case because of darkness. So think about what we're going to answer to God. We're in the dark here, is what he's saying. We cannot draw up our case because of the darkness. We're in the dark. We don't know. Verse 20, should he be told that I want to speak? Did anyone ever wish to be swallowed up? That's a rhetorical question. Elihu is saying, should God be told that I want to speak? Well, listen, I don't want to commit suicide. I mean, Job, that's what you're doing. You're challenging God. I don't want to die. Did anyone ever wish to be swallowed up? I'm not going to do that. I'll skip verse 21 because I inserted it between 18 and 19. So verse 22, out of the north comes golden splendor. Around God is awesome majesty. This might be a little easier to understand if we note that north is actually the word Zaphon. In other words, Mount Zaphon. This has come up before. It's can be thought of sort of as the Canaanite Mount Olympus, right? But evidently they mined gold up there. So this verse may mean from Zaphon comes gold, but around God is awesome majesty, comparing a mountain that has gold in it with the awesome majesty of God. The Almighty, we cannot find him. He is great in power and justice. In abundant righteousness, he will not violate. Therefore, mortals fear him. He does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. Alternative translation, therefore mortals fear him. Even the wise cannot see him. Well, that was a complicated section that we just got through. That brings us to the end of the words of Elihu, the discourses of Elihu.
Steve?
Next week.
Steve?
Yes.
Would this be a good time to ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I've noticed since we've been studying Job, on several occasions, you've pointed out where a verse is out of order.
Yes.
And that was a totally new concept to me. Does that happen in other books as well with this much frequency?
Not with this much frequency. The Job is a very difficult book. And there's some scribal errors. You know, verses out of order are sometimes caused by a scribe copying, and then he says, oh, I missed one, right? And rather than throwing out the page and having to do it over, he just puts the missing material right where he is, right? That's sometimes how those verses get out of order. And there are scribal errors. Words are duplicated. There's one place in here that I noticed in one of my reference books that the expert writing says, well, there's a missing word here, and it's probably because it should be noun verb, but there's just a verb. So how does that work? The noun probably started with the same sequence of consonants as the verb. And so because of that confusion, the scribe just copied the one word and not both of them, right? So things like that happen. I mean, even in the New Testament, you have, at least New Testament Greek has vowels. So, you know, we're ahead of the game there. But there are still problems of where to divide letters into words. And when scribes copy a word or a line twice, in the jargon of translators, that's called ditography, unintentionally repeating a word or a line.
He didn't have whiteout back then, huh?
Nope. Nope.
And they didn't have Microsoft Word that will highlight when you've written the twice, you know?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Who were these scribes?
Pardon?
Who were the scribes?
Oh, scribes were experts at the time of Jesus. The scribes were the lawyers, the Bible lawyers, right? They were charged with copying and interpreting the scriptures.
But it is a really good question. How often in the Old Testament? Because I know by New Testament we had Greek, so we had vowels, although not much punctuation.
Yeah, no punctuation.
As Jeannie Armstrong pointed out once when she rewrote a passage in one of the letters of Paul, completely changed the meaning by changing where the comma is.
Oh, of course.
You know, it's like let's eat grandma or let's eat grandma.
Yeah.
But for the Old Testament books, I guess I would expect a lot more of these errors because Hebrew is such a difficult language to copy perfectly. But is there any other book in the Old Testament that has this many errors?
This many. There you go. Yeah. Okay, I can't claim to have this detailed a knowledge of all of the books of the Old Testament. So from what I've read, my expert witnesses here, the reference books I'm referring to, Job is a particular problem. Okay. It's one of the most difficult books in the Old Testament.
Okay.
We're just about ready to get back to the big room, I think. Any other quick questions? If not, thank you all for coming. Next week, God finally gets to talk, and we'll finish up the book then.
Very good.
Thanks.